And we want to return now to our discussion on the Malaysia Airlines flight, which was shot down on the Ukraine-Russia border earlier today. Captain Ross Amer is a retired commercial pilot with decades of experience flying the Boeing 777. He joins us on the phone from Irvine, California. Ross, it's good to talk to you, or Rusty, whichever you prefer. I want to ask you this. First of all, are you surprised that a commercial flight was flying through this airspace, considering the conflict that's been going on in the eastern Ukraine?
Good afternoon. Yes, I am very surprised. There has been warnings issued by FAA and other authorities warning airlines and airline pilots of the conflict in this area. And my question would be why these guys were flying in this area. There is one aspect, of course, as a commercial pilot for a U.S. airline backed by a union, I could say I don't feel comfortable flying in this area. I'm not sure if that captain of the Malaysian Airlines had that luxury to decline flying because, dispatch and the airline determines what route you're flying. However, it ultimately is the captain of the aircraft could make that decision. Unfortunately, some of these third world countries or rising economic powers, they don't have that luxury.
And of course, U.S. officials have confirmed that this plane was shot down. So the likelihood of this being a plane failure is nil now, especially considering how reliable this plane is. Now, Rusty, I know that you're not an accident investigator, but what we're hearing reports of is that the debris field is as large as 9 miles wide. What does a debris field that big tell you about the nature of that crash?
Unfortunately, it tells me that there was a breakup of the aircraft in flight. If it's that wide of an area, that means that aircraft started breaking up in the air, kind of reinforcing the theory. Mind you, we're all speculating right now. I hate to speculate. Even though our people are saying it was a missile, we really don't know until we actually discover the black boxes, pieces of the aircraft, and the investigators determined that it definitely was a missile. But the enormity of the size of the debris field kind of tells me that whatever happened, this aircraft kind of broke up at altitude.
And of course, it seems to make sense, and you talk about the speculation, although we do have news organizations that are confirming that it was shot down by a missile. But of course, the pro-Russian rebels had shot down 2 Ukrainian military planes just in the last few days. And those planes, those cargo planes, make it seem to make sense that they thought this was a Ukrainian military plane. However, I know that you know what those other 2 planes look like. I can't remember what they're called. But is there any way to confuse a 777 with a military cargo plane?
Yes. The guy on the ground looking at a radar scope, it's very hard, unless if they have actually a secondary radar with the signature of the aircraft, with a call sign, everything in there. The military radar, if it's a crude one that either rebels or the Ukrainian have, it is possible for them to mistake a commercial. All they see is a blip on their radar screen. I'm not sure exactly if they actually have the capability of identifying whether if it was a commercial or a military aircraft.
Let me also ask you, Rusty, what does this say about the Boeing 777, with the crash of Malaysia Airlines flight, or disappearance rather, of flight 370, and then this one we believe being shot out of the air? Very likely neither of these incidents had anything to do with the integrity of the plane. But does this call into question this model, this plane at all?
No, I don't think so. Regardless of the last incident with Malaysian and now this, 777 is perhaps one of the safest. If you consider the number of aircraft that are flying around the world, number of hours that they fly, number of passengers, it is by far the safest aircraft still in the commercial service. And especially if we're talking about a missile strike, it really does not go against the safety of the aircraft itself.
Yeah, but it sure is a tragedy. Ross Rusty Amer, thank you so much. We do appreciate your expertise.
My pleasure.
Now for some different kind of analysis, we turn to former U.S. Ambassador to Georgia and Kazakhstan, Bill Courtney. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Bill, hey, it's good to see you under very terrible circumstances, but quite frankly, whenever we're talking about Ukraine lately, it's never really good news. Of course, the separatists have reportedly blamed Russia, or they certainly will. Russia has blamed Kiev, Ukraine, for this plane crash. Who do you think is likely responsible? And let me tell you why I'm asking. I imagine it would take quite sophisticated technology in order to shoot a commercial airliner of this kind that was so high in the sky out of the air. So who has that kind of technology?
Well, most likely this is a Russian-made anti-aircraft missile called the S-300, also called a couple of other names. But the S-300 has a capability to attack targets twice as high as the Malaysian airliner was flying. There are very few anti-aircraft systems that really have that capability. This is a system that the U.S. leaned on Russia not to export to Iran. Iran had wanted this system probably to be able to protect its nuclear facilities against an Israeli attack. So it's a very capable system. Russia has a lot of them. Ukraine has some. The rebels claim to have acquired some. The circumstances of this suggest that inexperienced operators may have been involved, and as the pilot said with whom you just talked, those operators may not have been able to identify that this was a civilian aircraft.
So if it is determined that pro-Russian separatists made this mistake, but with Russian equipment, what's the fallout for Russia?
Well, the fallout for Russia will be dramatic. The Russians, under that circumstance, would claim that the rebels are not really under their control, that the rebels may have acquired that S-300 system by stealing it from Ukrainian forces. The Russians will try to call for international negotiations on this sort of thing, condemnation perhaps in the United Nations Security Council of Ukraine for carrying out military actions in eastern Ukraine. So it's a little bit unclear. But right now, I think the West is going to look hard at responding perhaps in a fairly serious way. Sanctions could be much greater. When the Soviet Union shot down the Korean Airlines 007 in 1983, the United States, for example, denied Aeroflot landing rights in the United States.
Well, speaking of those sanctions being much greater, new sanctions were announced by the United States against Russia, much to the chagrin of Russia. So when you say greater sanctions, you mean greater than the ones that were just announced?
Yes, and from President Obama's standpoint, it's fortunate that he announced those last night before the aircraft was shot down, because he's been under a fair amount of criticism from the Congress and others here for not levying tougher sanctions on Russia. So he did do that last night. Now this incident has occurred. International sanctions, especially Western sanctions on Russia, could be quite substantial if it turns out that Russia was involved in this.
Would these substantial sanctions then finally serve to de-escalate the tensions and force Russia's hand into exerting their influence over those separatists?
That's quite possible. Now, let me just say, it's still unclear that Russia was involved or the rebels were involved in shooting down, so we can't reach conclusions too quickly. But if Russia's hand was involved in this, then the Kremlin probably will begin to think harder about whether the cost versus the gains of supporting the rebels in eastern Ukraine are those costs too high. And instead, the Kremlin might decide, well, let's just take Crimea, which we already have control of, and perhaps pull out of eastern Ukraine. But that's not clear yet.
All right, Bill Courtney, as always, it's very enlightening to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie.
and you're watching Arise America.